40 minutes. That's how long it took for the South China Sea to teeter on the edge of open war between two superpowers. A Chinese warship just opened fire on a civilian boat without warning, and miles away, an American force had been waiting for this exact moment for 6 weeks. What follows is the tensest countdown the Pacific has seen in a generation. At exactly 0614 hours on a gray Tuesday morning, the flat, glassy water off Second Aurora Shoal erupted into chaos. The Philippine resupply boat Lapu-Lapu 7, a converted fishing vessel loaded with rice, fuel drums, and a rotation of 8 Marines bound for the grounded outpost on the reef, was less than 400 meters from the shoal when the Chinese corvette Feng Huang, a Type 056A, stationed on routine patrol for the past 11 days, suddenly altered course and closed to point-blank range. There was no warning shot, no hailing call, just the sudden bark of a Type 730 CIWS opening up, its 30mm rounds chewing through the Lapu-Lapu 7's wheelhouse at a rate of 4,200 rounds per minute. The helmsman was killed instantly. The boat began taking on water within seconds, listing hard to port as Marines dove into the water under a hail of tracer fire, skipping off the waves around them. What Beijing believed was a clean, deniable act of intimidation was, in fact, walking directly into a trap 6 weeks in the making. At the same time, 60 nautical miles to the northeast, the radar operators aboard the USS Halsey, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer running under emissions control as part of a classified shadow-escort mission, watched their tactical display light up with a Priority 1 alert. The AN/SPY-6 array had picked up the Feng Huang's fire control radar locking weapons, the unmistakable signature of an active engagement. Simultaneously, an MQ-9BC Guardian drone orbiting at 22,000 feet, invisible to Chinese air search radar, streamed real-time full-motion video of the attack directly into the Combined Maritime Operations Center in Hawaii. The adversary believed they had achieved total surprise. They had no idea that an unprecedented multinational response protocol, built specifically to answer this exact scenario, had already been activated the moment the first CIWS round left the barrel. This was not an isolated act of aggression. It was the visible edge of a strategy Beijing had been assembling for the better part of a year. In the days leading up to the strike, 3 Chinese maritime militia trawlers, vessels that had spent months blending into the fishing fleet around the shoal, quietly repositioned themselves into a loose triangle formation, their AIS transponders going dark within minutes of the Feng Huang's opening burst. This was the modern face of gray zone warfare, unmarked hulls forming a floating picket line, ready to obstruct any rescue attempt and to muddy the video record with confusion and crossfire. Overhead, a Chinese Y-9 electronic warfare aircraft began flooding the region's maritime radio frequencies with static, attempting to sever the Lapu-Lapu 7 survivors' distress calls before they could reach Manila. Beneath the surface, a Yuan-class submarine that had been loitering silently along the shoal's steep drop-off for the past 30 hours began flooding its torpedo tubes, a deliberate signal, broadcast on passive sonar for anyone listening, that any American intervention would come at a cost measured in steel and lives. What would you do in Washington's position, watching this unfold in real time? Drop a comment below, because the decision that came next would define the next decade of Pacific security. The moment the Halsey's Combat Information Center confirmed hostile fire on a partner nation vessel, the ship's captain ordered flank speed 32 knots and turned the destroyer's bow directly toward the shoal. Riding on her flank was the Australian frigate HMAS Ballarat, part of the same quietly assembled task group, its Nulka decoy systems already spun up. The Halsey's AEGIS combat system pushed the Feng Huang's targeting data across Link 16 to every friendly platform in range within 4 seconds of the first radar lock. On the bridge, the American captain gave the order that would echo across naval history channels for years. Vertical launch system, spin up. Weapons tight, but I want a firing solution on that corvette in 90 seconds. Nobody wanted this fight, but nobody intended to lose it either. By 0619, 5 minutes into the crisis, the Feng Huang's crew had ceased fire on the sinking resupply boat and begun maneuvering aggressively to block the approach of a Philippine Coast Guard cutter racing in from 12 miles out. This was the moment the true architecture of the ambush revealed itself. The 3 fishing trawlers surged into blocking positions, forming a drifting steel wall precisely as designed, their hulls riding low and heavy. Later analysis would suggest they were carrying concealed anti-ship loitering munitions in modified deck containers, a chilling evolution of the shadow fleet doctrine seen elsewhere in recent years. Any attempt to punch through the blockade risked triggering a wider engagement neither side could fully control. The Halsey's tactical officer called it exactly what it was: a hostage-taking dressed up as a fishing dispute. At 0623, the situation escalated into the air domain. A pair of Chinese J-16 fighters scrambled from Woody Island, streamed toward the shoal at Mach 1.3, their fire control radars sweeping the sky in an unmistakable show of force. Simultaneously, and this is the word that would define the entire encounter, a flight of two EA-18G Growlers launched from the carrier USS George Washington 30 minutes earlier on what had been logged as a routine training sortie, peeled off from their holding pattern and began aggressive electronic jamming, specifically tuned to the frequencies used by China's HQ-9 long-range air defense network stationed on the nearby artificial island chain. Within 90 seconds, radar screens across 3 Chinese command posts dissolved into static. This wasn't panic on the American side. It was execution, a scenario rehearsed 100 times in classified war games now unfolding exactly as drilled. Beneath the waves, the confrontation reached its most dangerous point. The USS Mississippi, a Virginia-class fast-attack submarine that had been shadowing the Yuan-class boat for the past 4 hours without detection, executed an active sonar ping directly into the Chinese submarine's baffles, the unmistakable underwater equivalent of a weapon pressed against the back of the head. On the Mississippi's sonar display, the Chinese boat's propeller cavitation spiked in a way that betrayed sudden, uncontrolled maneuvering. The Chinese submarine commander now understood, in the span of a single pulse, that his supposedly silent boat had been tracked, trailed, and targeted the entire time. Every advantage he believed he held had just evaporated. At 0631, 17 minutes into the crisis, the Halsey closed to within 2 nautical miles of the Fenghuang and issued its warning over bridge-to-bridge radio in flat, procedural English. Chinese warship, you have fired on a civilian vessel and are in violation of international maritime law. You have 300 seconds to cease all hostile maneuvers and permit rescue operations, or you will be considered a hostile combatant. The Fenghuang's captain, according to later intercepted communications, requested guidance from fleet headquarters on Hainan Island and received only silence for the first 90 agonizing seconds of the countdown. This was the moment the entire Chinese operation, so meticulously planned to stay just under the threshold of open war, began to visibly unravel. The trawler blockade, so effective moments earlier, meant nothing against an adversary who no longer needed to sail through it. The Halsey's SM-6 missiles didn't care about geography. At 0636, with the countdown clock reading under 90 seconds, the Philippine Coast Guard cutter finally broke through a gap in the blockade, deliberately left open, it would later be understood, by an American EA-18G jamming pass that had scrambled the trawler's own coordination frequencies. Survivors from the Lapu-Lapu 7 were pulled from the water, several suffering from shrapnel wounds, one Marine unconscious and hypothermic after 11 minutes adrift. Rescue divers reported the sea around the sinking hull tinted red. This was not a bloodless standoff. Real sailors and Marines had been shot at, and some would not walk away unhurt. At 0639, with less than a minute remaining on the American ultimatum, the Fenghuang went dead in the water. Its fire control radar shut down. Its CIWS mount rotated back to stowed position. Fleet headquarters on Hainan, watching the same jammed, degraded picture as everyone else, had made the calculation that no reef, no propaganda victory, and no gray zone doctrine was worth the first shots of a shooting war with a U.S. carrier strike group already inside missile range. The Yuan-class submarine, still pinned by the Mississippi's active sonar, began a slow, careful ascent toward deeper water, its commander unwilling to test whether the American boat's torpedo tubes were as ready as its sonar suggested. By 0648, the crisis that had threatened to become the opening battle of a Pacific War instead dissolved into a tense, silent withdrawal. The 3 militia trawlers scattered, their AIS transponders flickering back to life one by one, as if nothing had happened. The J-16 fighters broke off their approach and returned to Woody Island without ever crossing into visual range of the American formation. The Fenghuang was escorted, not detained, not boarded, simply watched, as it limped back toward its patrol line, its crew undoubtedly aware that every second of the encounter had been recorded by 3 different nations' sensors. There was no victory parade. No triumphant press conference. Just the quiet, grinding professionalism of sailors who had spent 40 of the most dangerous minutes of their careers doing exactly what they'd trained for. And a diplomatic cable traffic that would keep State Department lawyers awake for a week. The Philippine government, backed by satellite imagery and gun camera footage from the drone overhead, released a formal protest within hours. Beijing's foreign ministry, for its part, claimed the Fenghuang had been provoked, a line that satellite timestamps directly contradicted, though the contradiction would do little to cool the rhetoric in the days that followed. What this encounter revealed, more than any single weapon system or tactical maneuver, is the uncomfortable truth of Pacific security in the back half of this decade. The line between gray zone coercion and open war has never been thinner, and it is held in place not by treaties or goodwill, but by the discipline of the sailors standing watch on both sides at 3 in the morning. The Halsey's crew didn't win a war that day. They prevented one, by seconds, by a jammed radar frequency, by a submarine commander's decision not to test his luck against a torpedo tube he couldn't see. That is a margin no nation should be comfortable relying on indefinitely. The reef is still there, half submerged, disputed, unremarkable to look at. But somewhere in a naval intelligence vault, the recordings of those 40 minutes are being studied frame by frame because everyone involved understands the same uncomfortable fact. Next time, the jamming might not work, the countdown might not end at 0, and the sea that swallowed the Lapu-Lapu 7's wheelhouse that morning might, one day, swallow far more than a single boat. Stay sharp, stay informed, because in the South China Sea, the next incident is never a matter of if, only when.